The world continues to be a very violent and chaotic place. Things continue to seem like they're spinning out of control. We have just in the last of us 24 hours, we have the death of the Iranian president and his foreign minister and several other people of his travel party. And we have the situation in Ukraine continuing to, well, go the way it's been going. I'm still in London, and we'll be for another few more days here. But let's jump right into the news here. We've been out of pocket for a few days and didn't want to leave you too much longer without bringing some kind of analysis on what's going on. First of all, as you're seeing on the screens here, the president of Iran has died. Now, I'll just tell you, when I first heard about this, as well as I know many other people around the world, they thought, was this an accident or was this an assassination? Because they're, especially Israel in that region, has been making so many assassinations of so many different high-ranking people in the Iranian government. They've been making lots of threats against the Iranian regime in retaliation for that the 13 April response to the Israeli attack against their embassy in Beirut, in Damascus. So that's one of the first questions that a lot of people are going to wonder. At this point, however, it so far appears that it may have actually been an accident. It was a very heavily fogged area, and it appears that the helicopter may have literally ran into the side of the mountain, or it could have had catastrophic mechanical failure. At this point, they don't know. They're in the process right now in Iran of getting the wreckage together, and then I'm sure they're going to be doing very thorough analysis on it. But I guess it's kind of surprising, I have to admit, in a little ways, that so far you haven't heard any kinds of warnings from their senior Iranian officials. They seem to be acting like it was just an accident and something they're trying to figure out. Now, some of the issues is that they have placed the first vice president, Mohammed Mokbar, in charge, and he will be a temporary leader in between now and 50 days from now, when their constitution requires a new election. And apparently he's going to be one of the senior people on charge of that, or one of the senior people that's at potential to be elevated into the position with being elected. Although by all accounts, it's not exactly a lot of free and fair elections in Iran anyway. So, only the people who are preferred by the Ayatollah and who are cleared by him get to compete anyway. So it's not exactly a free and fair election. I think that it's going to be whoever the Ayatollah wants, and it could be this guy. We don't really know for sure. At the moment, the country is in 5 days of mourning, so they're not really making any statements right now. I think they're probably using that opportunity to kind of be quiet and to try to find out what's going on before they make any statements. But it's honestly not out of the question to consider that there could have been some foul play. And I assure you that the Iranian side is in fact worrying about that. And they're going to be checking everything they can to find out, because Iran doesn't have any motive to find something like that. For example, they're not going to claim that there was an attack when there wasn't, because then they would have to respond. And that would only invite a strong counter strike from the Israeli side and possibly even the United States. So they're not going to go off the deep end here and start claiming somebody was guilty if they really weren't. But if they find something, they also can't go completely quiet, because, you're talking about the head of state. So let's just hope and pray that this is not one of those cases to where somebody did something really stupid, but actually it was just an unfortunate accident, as bad as it was for the Iranian regime and some of the people in Iran. And I know not all, because many of them intensely dislike Raisi. So I doubt that there's a lot of tears being shed in many parts of Iran tonight. But that's an issue for the Iranian people, something that they're going to have to come to grips with and handle. Let's just make sure that does not get out of hand or spin out of control any further, because things are already so volatile in the region and in many parts of the world. You just had, I think, since I've been gone, also the leader of the prime minister of Slovakia was attempted an assassination, and they're still trying to unravel exactly what happened with that. But certainly there's a lot of speculation that, hey, he was one of the few Western leaders that was not anti-Russian, and some are suggesting that was what was going on there. A lot of speculation at this point. We don't have any facts, but the bottom line is you're seeing the angst level and the anxiety and the tensions are continuing to raise. And so events like this, which maybe by themselves are actually innocent, or who knows, maybe it was just kind of some crazy guy, but you just never know when something like that may spark something bigger. I don't have to tell you any more about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 that started World War I. And by itself, he was a a moderate figure. He wasn't a head of state or anything, and it should not have have resulted in that. But there was so much tension under the surface and behind the scenes in Europe during World War One that it just took that one spark to light what was already a lot going on. And that's one of my concerns, whether this one or something else. I've been talking about some dark horse kinds of actions here, or something unexpected happens that could have consequences beyond the surface of it, because there's so much tension, especially in the Israeli world, or the world between Israel and the Hamas, and then of course in Russia. And there's so many things going into the Ukraine war that really give me concern. And speaking of the Russian-Ukraine war, let me just show you some of the recent reasons for some of my concern, and what I think the U.S. needs to get a much better handle on. That even while I've been gone, they haven't been doing a very good job of it. Here is the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin talking, I believe it was earlier today, or perhaps it was yesterday. All I can say is it just seems like more fiction.
Ukraine's survival and success are central to Ukrainian security, European security, global security, and American security. We're meeting at a moment of challenge. Putin's invaders have launched another offensive onto sovereign Ukraine territory, and the Kremlin's forces will try to make further advances in the weeks ahead and try to carve out a buffer zone along the Ukrainian border. This is a hard and dangerous fight, but Ukraine's defenders are showing extraordinary courage and skill.
Now, look, I get it that you want to show extraordinary courage and will. You want to make it clear that that the Ukraine side is doing good. You want them to do good, but you have to be realistic about it. And look, and when you're starting off, when your first words out of your mouth are nonsense, it's hard to take anything you say after that seriously as well. And when he says that this situation right here, this war is essential to American or Ukrainian national security, European national security, American national security, and global security. I mean, that's just absurd. That at face value, that is just nonsense. And it's not fooling any people. I think the only people who are fooled by that kind of ridiculous statements are the people who are already supporting what you're doing, which doesn't make any sense. But any normal person looking at that would say, this is a fight between Russia and Ukraine over NATO coming into, trying to come in rather, to Ukraine. And the military alliance, 32, it would have been 33 members coming up to their border on the literal border, thousands of kilometers of total space. No nation's going to do that. I assure you, the United States of America would never, under any circumstances, allow China or Russia to have a military alliance with Mexico. No chance whatsoever, and be passive and say, oh, well, hey, they said it was just a defensive alliance, so we're good. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, fellas. Come on in and do whatever you need to do there. Just make sure it's not offensive. Of course not. We would go crazy. I mean, you see people already going crazy and warning, sending all kinds of alarms because China has made some artificial military reefs in the South China Sea, something that could just barely expand a little bit of power into their backyard. And the idea that we would allow them to have military forces, a military alliance with Mexico on our entire southern border is absurd. At face value, nobody, I don't think, is going to argue that. Why then does anybody think that that's not going to be a problem for Russia? And so, yeah, we're going to continue on and saying, because if Russia and Ukraine don't solve it, then it's a global catastrophe. Let me tell you something very clearly. The only way this turns into a global catastrophe is if the West makes it so. This war could end in a matter of weeks if we did the right thing, if we did the wise thing, the hard thing, the wise thing, though. That would make sense. Something that's achievable, a political and military objective that would tamp this thing down, put a cap on it, and start the very long and slow process of rebuilding all this. It's going to be necessary for many, many years to come. Or we can continue to be foolish and saying things like you see Secretary Austin saying here, that is detached from reality, that nobody of a serious mind in the world actually believes that if Ukraine doesn't win its war, that somehow that's going to be causing national security problems for Europe, which has nuclear weapons. They have the nuclear umbrella of NATO. They have nuclear weapons. They have a huge Air Force, Army, Navy, Space Force. I mean, they've got all those things. And right now between Ukraine and Russia, Russia has the overwhelming advantage. I've told you that many times. The balance is out of proportion. But if you add in all 32 members of the Western Alliance, if they suddenly got into a military confrontation, then it's the exact opposite. It flips on it. And look, there's no way it's going to stay conventional. If you get NATO and Russia fighting, it's not going to stay conventional. Just get that straight. Get that through your head right now. It is fantasy to believe that you're going to be able to fight a conventional fight with Russia and not go nuclear. It's just irrational to think that way. Putin keeps saying it over and over that if this goes into a situation where we can't protect ourselves and our nation is at existential risk, we'll use tactical nuclear weapons. And that's why they're in the process and have been for doing these non-strategic nuclear force exercises right now. They mean it. Look, Lord West, Admiral Lord West from the Ukraine, I'm sorry, from the UK, was here in London. I spoke right next to him on a panel at an event in the British Parliament building. What was it? 3 days ago, on the 17th. At that time, he surprised a lot of people because apparently he has been kind of the government position, of the UK, which is kind of the same thing that Austin's been saying. And he said, no. He said, look, first of all, this all has happened because the Western Alliance forced an issue of NATO in Ukraine, even though we knew that was a little red line for Russia. And it's unwinnable now. These are his words, not mine. It's unwinnable for Ukraine. So the wisest thing is to seek a negotiated settlement now. More people are starting to come to that realization. And the hope is that if, people of heavyweights like Lord Admiral West are coming to that conclusion, that maybe others will as well. But you see, at least according to Austin, it's not. And of course, as long as Austin's going to sing this tune, guess who else is going to sing that tune? Vladimir Zelensky.
There was a report from the Commander-in-Chief, General Syrskyi, is on the front line, directly in our combat brigades. As a result of these days of the whole week, we have secured stronger positions in the Kharkiv region. At the same time, our forces are quite effectively destroying the occupier in the Donetsk directions, in particular in the areas of Chasiv Yar and other locations. In fact, the occupier fails to achieve its goal of stretching our forces thin and thus weakening Ukraine on a wide front from the Kharkiv to the Donetsk regions.
That's just, fantasy part two. That, yes, Russia's coming in the north, and yes, they have made up to 10-kilometer penetration over about 40 or 50 kilometers broad. And yeah, they're continuing to make some penetrations in the Donbass area. But, we've moved some forces around. And to make these categorical statements, they failed in their operation. They haven't failed in anything. They're at the very beginning of this. Russia doesn't do things, in like big splashy moments and that's it. I think I've told you before the last time we were on here that Russia has used just a small number of its forces. The majority of those forces, even in the north, have yet to be put into play yet. So far, it's been a reconnaissance in force, and probably the biggest grouping hasn't even been employed yet. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been moving forces from the south and from other parts of Ukraine up into that northern part there to try and stop that. And they have genuinely slowed down the punch. So the first 4 or 5 days, it was a pretty fast move, and it has definitely slowed down now, though it does continue to move forward, especially in Volchansk, where the northern part of the city has now basically been taken by Russia, and they have crossed one of the river points, and they're going now into the southern part. Meanwhile, they're also in the center of the zone, starting to push south, and now they're going to be pushing into also Volchansk from 2 different directions. So we'll see how that unfolds in the coming days. But the bottom line is that Russia continues to move through. What Zelensky doesn't mention in there, again, is the fact that the Ukraine side, after having claimed for 12 months to be building defenses in the north, built squat. A handful of things. Zelensky had a bunch of big PR movements up there earlier this year. I think it was February, March, and claimed that they had all these strong defenses built up in the Kharkiv area. And there was some complaints that the Donetsk area didn't have as many, and they wondered why. Well, it turned out they didn't have anything up there other than what was for show. Most of it, as you've probably seen some of those videos, were just piled up. So with dragon's teeth, other trenches just didn't get dug, or they got dug so deep that they're shallow that they're meaningless and they're useless. And there's large sections where nothing was built at all. And that's what Russia's been exploiting here so far. Meanwhile, in the Donetsk area, Some of the area, Chesapeake Yar is seeing some incremental progress by the Russian side. It did slow down for a while because Ukraine has rushed reinforcements in there. They've also rushed them up into the Kharkiv area. They're slowing down the Russian assault so far. But again, let me point out, Russia still has not come in the Sumy area, in the north central area, and they have not sent their main force in even in that area. That is probably still to come. So even though it's slowed down there, that's not indicative of, these right here. This is what Zelensky claimed earlier, that they had, these great defensive positions, except that when the Russians come in, they just rolled in across the border. And those things only existed where the cameras were rolling and apparently nowhere else. That all looked great. It briefed well. And it fools the civilians, ironically. It fools the Americans. Didn't fool the Russians because they knew where to come and where not to come. So they didn't go where the film was made. They went in the areas where there weren't any fortifications built at all. And so now then we have the issue of what's going to come next and what's going to happen with these guys. Now, as Zelensky keeps making all these nonsense, big talk here, he's not the only one. Lloyd Austin's not the only one. And now back from retirement is Victoria Nuland.
I think if the attacks are coming directly from over the line in Russia, that those bases ought to be fair game, whether they are where missiles are being launched from or where they are where troops are being supplied from. I think it's time for that because Russia has obviously escalated this war, attacking Russia's second city, Kharkiv, which is not on the front lines, and trying to decimate it without ever having to put a boot on the ground. So I think it is time to give the Ukrainians more help hitting these bases inside Russia.
Okay, now to an extent, that actually makes a little bit of sense. If you're a Ukrainian side, you say we're being attacked from Russian, and we can see across the border where they're lining up. From a military perspective, you'd say, yeah, I want to hit those concentration forces over there. That, from a tactical perspective, genuinely makes sense. But we have to look at it from a strategic perspective, and especially Victoria Nuland, who is advocating for the administration where she was working just a few months back, has got to look at it from the area of our national security needs. Does it make sense to Ukraine and to American national security to expand the war into Russia proper using American military gear, using a long-range weapon systems from the NATO side, especially when Russia's been talking about that? I mean, the answer is self-evident. The answer is no, because militarily, while that would help that one piece of the fight there tactically, it's not going to change the outcome of the war. But if you now send missile systems from the United States into Russia, then and they've been talking about this, that they may expand to new target sets within Ukraine itself. So they have been, even though it's not common knowledge, they have been fairly restrained on the target list and the things that they have attacked. It's not clear how that's going to help if you now prompt them into attacking more areas outside of that. And that's exactly what's been going on. And if it goes on further, if they go from talking about it to actually doing it, then you're going to have a lot of problems here because it could get worse for Ukraine. But firing missiles into Russia is not helping Ukraine on the operational level. That's not going to stop the war. It's just going to it's basically, I think Admiral West also said this, it was a good phrase. It's basically like poking the bear even more, like with your finger, just sticking his chest. Well, yeah, he hasn't hit you with his paw yet, but if you keep doing that, he may. So that's not going to stop Russia, but it could cause him to expand it. And now that you've made it worse for Ukraine, again, from a military perspective, if Ukraine was like this close to making it, if they were like, boy, just a little bit more help and they could start to turn things back in their direction, then it might actually make sense, even on a tactical level. It might be worth taking that risk, but it's not. They're falling behind everywhere, and especially now they've been exposed to not having any good defenses in the north. If Russia wasn't planning on coming in with heavy forces in, they probably are now, because you can't build those kinds of things to inequality in a matter of a week or two. So that could really be a new northern front could be opened up in there. We're going to see what Russia's going to end up doing with that. We also have, I almost hesitate to even use this anymore, just because it makes no such sense. But in a sense, to give you an idea of where the thought process in the United States and where different people are and where different, schools of thought are right here. Here's John Bolton, again, giving his very sage advice on what we should do next, along with Victoria Nuland, I think.
I don't think they should unless they're prepared to give up what was agreed to with the only truly democratically elected president in Russian history at the Belovezha Agreement in 1991, when the leaders of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia agreed to dissolve the Soviet Union along the existing lines of the 15 republics in the Soviet Union. Russia agreed to that. Belarus agreed to it. That's what happened. And Yeltsin understood that meant giving up the Donbass, giving up Crimea. So if you don't hold to that agreement, every other successor republic from the Soviet Union is at risk of Russian aggression.
Now, that's just Bolton just twisting history around to mean things it never did, and to create fear among others. It's a ham-fisted, pathetic attempt to make all these other former Soviet republics think, oh, wow, he really is going to come to me, because if Russia didn't mean that then they won't mean this now. Except that's not anything associated with what happened when the Soviet Union dissolved. He didn't, quote, give up. Yeltsin didn't give up the Donbass and all these other areas. They dissolved the Soviet Union. So all of these places became independent republics at the time. Nobody's changed it. The Donbass wasn't a country. It wasn't a republic. It was part of Ukraine. So to try and draw an analogy between that and some hypothetical future elsewhere in the former Soviet bloc is just nonsense. And it's just a pathetic attempt, like I say, to try and cause other people to be feared, but it won't work because people see this. They understand that, especially the participants. They know what's going on. They're also not stupid in that they are wondering, oh, well, just was it for no reason that Russia went in to attack Ukraine? Everybody who's aware of it and has their eyes open knows for sure it's the fact that Ukraine was trying to suck NATO into it, or maybe better put, that NATO was trying to force its way into Ukraine so that it could be a problem for Russia, because that's just been this lust we've had since 1997, constantly moving eastward. Even though there was no threat there, we just had this lust to keep moving with our military forces forward toward the Russian border, and they just want to complete that path here. That's the truth of it. There's no need for it. It's never been about our security. It's never made us safer. All these different rounds towards Russia has never made us safer. Look, folks, when the NATO forces were formed in 1949, there was a very good reason to have it, and it was desperately needed for all the Western countries, most of whom were still very weak. From the Second World War, they were weak in manpower. Their infrastructure was still devastated. It hadn't been rebuilt, even close to it. And they needed a mutual security pact that everybody could pull together with their numbers, because the Soviet Union had so much more. And it was a genuine threat. Of course, it would become a nuclear threat later on as well. So it made sense then. And that's why you had such unanimity and consensus among NATO without any problem for so many years, up until the end of 1991. That's when everything changed. And when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia became an impotent shadow of the former Soviet Union, there was no more need to have the NATO forces. That basically was done. NATO alliances are not supposed to be permanent edifices. They're supposed to exist when they're needed for either independent, collective, or bilateral security, however it needs to work out. And then when the threat's gone, then you go away from it so you don't keep spending money on something that's not needed. But there's too many people in the West, the Boltons, the Austins, the Victoria Nulands, Jack Keens, et al. These guys are blind. Add Ben Hodges to that list, many others. They're blind to the Cold War. They think that it must be a perpetual thing. You saw David Petraeus on our channel not long ago actually brag, I'm for forever wars. I'm not for ending forever wars. They're blind to it. They can't see outside of war. They must have war. And the problem is they've got so much credibility in the eyes of the public that people keep going that direction, and people keep listening to them, to our collective harm. And that's why we have channels like this, to try to bring you the truth about it, so you see what's actually going on and what's actually at stake and where the risks are and where they aren't. And that's what I'm trying to convey here. And that's why so many of these people I think they have almost lost their minds in what they're trying to do, and can't see anything beyond military feats. And they seem to be unaware that the very policies they're advocating are increasing our risk and increasing the potential harm for our country, for Europe, for Ukraine even. Ukraine never needed to go to war. This was absolutely possible to have averted war. I can't guarantee that it would have been averted because we didn't give it a try. But I think based on the fundamentals that existed at the time, and I wrote about this months before the war started, so I'm certainly not coming to this party late, there was very many practical, achievable diplomatic paths that could have avoided war altogether. Nobody needed to go to war. And instead, we are where we are here. So now I'm trying to bring some sanity into it again, using the same fundamentals, the same kind of analysis to show that we need to end the war now. We don't need to keep going on there. We don't need to keep on with the fiction. And listen to, here's another thing, which all those kind of people I just mentioned here, they don't ever talk about. The war is going to end at some point, in some way, whether the way it's most likely at the current pace is that Russia wins and end up giving terms of surrender to the Ukraine side, or whether everybody comes to their senses and they make a negotiated settlement. You have, in fact, here, thanks for bringing that back up, Gary. You have, I believe that was earlier today, you have the Secretary of the National Security for Ukraine recognizes that this is going to have to end in negotiations. And here's what Putin said just a couple of days ago, echoing the same thing.
Добиться стратегического положения не получилось, но нате вам вот теперь вот наши условия. С дуба рухнули, что ли? С какой стати-то? Сук, на котором сами сидят. Глупость ужасная. Ну, им никак не остановиться. Теперь, значит, запищали, давайте там срочно конференцию. Пожалуйста. Россия будет участвовать? Мы готовы участвовать в мирных переговорах. Но мы вас не приглашаем. Вот те кино, здрасте, приехали.
So Putin, and we've talked about this many times, going back to before the war started, March, April of 2022, later in 2022, early in 2023, again, just a few months ago, there was another aborted attempt in Istanbul for a second time. The Tucker Carlson interview, now this one. Every time you look around, Russia's trying to say, hey, we want to make a negotiated settlement. We want to bring this thing to an end. And this nonsense about us wanting to go into the central part of NATO countries, any NATO country, is absurd. They say that all the time. They have shown with their actions they mean they want a negotiated settlement. Why are we not even trying? What we should be doing right now, based on what that official in Ukraine said, based on what Vladimir Putin said, we should be saying, hey, let's put all of our effort that we can into finding negotiated solutions. So naturally, you would go to the Secretary of State, right? I mean, that's where that power resides. That's who's supposed to be in that job. But instead, he's saying this.
What Putin destroyed, Russia should and must pay to rebuild. It's what international law demands. It's what the Ukrainian people deserve. Our Congress has given us the power to seize Russian assets in the United States. We intend to use it. We're working with our G7 partners to see that Russia's immobilized sovereign assets are used to remedy the damage that Putin continues to cause.
Those are the kind of things that you say to the losing side of a war, right? The Treaty of Versailles. I mean, that, one of the famous ones there, the negotiations that ended the war in the Pacific, the one that ended the war in the Atlantic, in Europe, in the Second World War. Those are terms that are given to the defeated, and they pay reparations, they do all this kind of things. Those kind of things are not given by the side losing to the side that's winning, because all that does is make them look at you with more contempt and make them likely pour on more military power. Why is our Secretary of State talking about telling the guy who's on the upside right militarily, that trying to tell him terms that he's going to pay for everything, even though we're the ones that have supported all this destruction that's going on both sides of the line? We've done nothing to try to end this war. The Secretary of State doesn't even attempt diplomacy. That's one of the things that aggravates me so much. He's the Secretary of State, the chief diplomat of America. That's his actual title. That's what he is. So where's the diplomacy? Why is the Secretary of State being the one that's talking about always moving more military forces or more threats to another country? They're not even talking to Russia right now. And I expected and assumed all the time we probably have some back channels things going on. And I don't know, maybe we do. But I've talked to some people here in London recently that claim to have some knowledge that say that there's been almost none. And certainly on any official level. And look, I don't care if you hate Russia. If you want to be a global power You have to talk to people you don't like. It should be self-evident. It is a requirement for power becomes responsibility and the wisdom to know how to use that power. We have none of that. There's not even the attempt. It's like we're going to continue to be blind to what's going on the ground. We're going to continue to pursue this fiction that can't be accomplished militarily. And then we're going to fail to try the things that can be accomplished. This war could be over in a couple of months. I guarantee you that. I do guarantee. I'll put my credibility on the line here. If I was in charge of that, we would have a cessation of hostilities and moving towards a peace within 2 months, probably less, but maybe within 2 months. It might go as far as 2 months. Otherwise, it could be less than that. Because it's not a hard thing for me to put my credibility in that, because I know that the side that's getting beat recognizes that the negotiations are necessary. The side that's winning openly claims and has put effort behind trying to find a negotiated settlement. What's the stick in the ointment? What's stopping this? Our side, the Western side, especially the United States, whether it's Great Britain, whether it's Germany, Italy, other European nations, NATO itself and Brussels, they're all going to follow our lead. So it's not them that are going to be good. France can make a lot of noise, but they're not going to lead anything because nobody's following them anyway. So it's the United States. If we want peace, if we want to bring this war to an end, we have the power to do it. We have the authority to do it. We have the resources to do it. We just don't have the will to do it. Instead, we want to continue all this war, and we're perfectly fine with large numbers of Ukrainian men paying with their lives every day, with Ukrainian cities continuing to get shelled every day and losing more territory every day. We seem to be okay with that. If there was any rational possibility where Ukraine could win this war conventionally and it not go nuclear, then I would actually support that. I would say, okay, if you can, put a block here that's not going to go nuclear, and Russia's invasion, which I don't agree with, and to this day have said nothing besides the fact that it is an illegal and unnecessary invasion. Russia could have handled it other ways, but they didn't. I will tell you that we would probably not do anything different than Russia did, as I said a minute ago here. That doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't mean Russia was right. But so many things in the international relations depend on what is and what isn't, not what should and shouldn't be. And right now, this is what is. So we have to deal with what is. And when you use all of our skills, all of our resources, all of our intellectual capacity, all of our physical capacity to get the damn war stopped. Stop the unnecessary killing of the Ukrainian people. Stop the bleed of their troops and the bleed of their land. Let's start putting our efforts into doing what we can to end the war. And that, more than anything else that Austin or Blinken are talking about, or Biden, all these things that they're talking about trying to make things safe are nonsense. This is how you make us safe. You end the war. You end the risk. That's how they keep us safe. That's how they preserve the NATO reliance from ever having to use Article 5. That's what we should do. But we just seem to keep going down this same road. Now I'm going to keep throwing their calling their bluff here. I'm going to keep holding their feet to the fire. We're going to keep telling you guys, like what we're doing here, what the truth is, so people can understand when they hear these guys say these kinds of things. And some people who've never been abroad, they've never fought in a war, they've never served in uniform, they don't know for sure if the Secretary of Defense is saying something untrue or the Secretary of State. They don't have any way of knowing that themselves. We do on this channel. We do. Gary and I know we have the resources, we have the knowledge, we have the experience. We're able to collect information from other places to show you that it's very valid and viable what we're talking about. It can end. So what they're saying isn't true. And we're going to keep bringing it to you because we are unintimidated and uncompromised, even in London, England. We are, and we're going to keep doing that for you. We're going to have another show for you tomorrow. I'm actually going to be in Paris, France, where we're going to be unintimidated and uncompromised there too. I'm not sure how it's going to work out. We're working out a little bit of logistics, but we'll figure something out. But we will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.